The topic covered in my previous video, the expedition of Noyan and Subutai, chasing Shah Muhammad of Khwarezm, campaigning through the Caucasus, Georgia, Shirvan, before entering the Eurasian steppe, battling the Kipchaks and chasing them off to the Battle of the Khalkha River with the Rus and the Kipchak alliance, is often discussed in historiography and modern scholarship as a raid or reconnaissance in force, intended not to conquer, but to collect intel, merely pass through these territories, and is, because of this, often depicted as one of the great feats of military history, the Mongols effectively circumnavigating the Caspian Sea. However, in a recent article, Stephen Pow, in his article The Last Campaign and Death of Noyan, which theorizes that Noyan was killed a couple days before the Battle of the Khalkha River. The evidence I will present in my video on that. In this article, he notes this tendency, and also notes that the historical sources from the 13th and 14th centuries actually tend to refer to this expedition exclusively as conquest. And when we look at what the sources are saying, as I presented in my previous video, they don't discuss the Mongols just going through collecting intel. What they present is the Mongols attacking the cities of northwestern, or Jebe and Subutai specifically, attacking the cities of northwestern Iran, Azerbaijan, the Kingdom of Georgia, the Caucasian region, attacking these cities and generally taking them, or they submitted, and appointing governors. 1222 is mostly spent punishing cities which revolted and killed those governors before ultimately passing through the Caucasus and engaging the Kipchaks, which I theorize might have been their sort of main target once they knew that Shah Muhammad was dead. Now, the fighting in the northwestern Iran, Azerbaijan, makes sense because this was sort of the extent of the Khwarezmian sphere of influence. The campaign as a whole was intended to conquer the Khwarezmian Empire, though parts of the empire, well, basically south of Khorasan, would not be fully incorporated until the 1230s. But our sources don't present these escapades, as it were, any different from the conquests of Khwarezm proper. And in fact, some of them, Rashid al-Din, for example, have Subutai and Zev requesting permission from Chinggis to continue conquering for a number of years before having to return to Mongolia. If it was just a raid, then it was fairly successful. Battles are fought, battles are won. Zev, anyways, disappears sometime in 1223. And aside from that encounter with the Volga Bulgars, there's a pretty successful navigation around the Caspian Sea. Mongols learned a lot about their western enemy, the Kipchak and the Rus, and providing valuable intel for their return in 1236 with the Great Western Invasion, which culminates in the disastrous Battle of Mohi in Liegnitz in Eastern Europe. Well, disastrous for the Europeans, went pretty good for the Mongols. However, if it was intended as conquest, well, things didn't go quite so hot for old Sub and Zev. See, while these regions in northwestern Iran and Azerbaijan, the Eldeguzids, did submit to the Mongols, they would ultimately be sort of relost to local forces and Jalal al-Din in the later 1220s. The Kingdom of Georgia, despite its defeats, and a couple cities perhaps being sacked, was largely survived, though would have suffer further depredations under Jalal al-Din. And as Stephen Pow theorizes, Zev was possibly killed a couple days before Khalkha River, rather than the supreme masterstroke of Subutai's planning, as it's often presented as, is rather sort of a by the skin of the teeth, you might say, and just manages to turn what was almost a rout into that stunning victory that it was, which was followed by the defeat by the Volga Bulgars on the Volga River, which Stephen Pow suggests was actually, despite how it's sometimes presented in modern literature, really wasn't. Perhaps if not crushing, embarrassing defeat for the Mongols. And so when we look at the campaign of the 1230s against the Volga Bulgars, Kipchak, Rus, and ultimately the Kingdom of Hungary, it's not so much the glorious Mongols completely overtaking this foe. I had no idea who they were, though it was kind of that. But is now much more of a campaign of revenge, avenging their defeats by the Volga Bulgars, avenging the death of Zev Noyan, and punishing the Rus and the Kipchak for their defiance. Of course, it's over the 1230s where Rus is dominated, that the rest of the Caucasus, Iran, and the former Khwarezmian territories are also incorporated by the Mongol Empire. Even if you argue, well, it was just pillaging, just raiding, and either way, the Mongols did gain valuable information. The Mongols were appointing governors. There was no effective difference between their actions in the Caucasus, or at least modern Azerbaijan, than there was a difference between their actions in Kyrgyzstan, Transoxania. Now, even though the territories south of Kyrgyzstan were not incorporated at this point, and including that territory in northwestern Iran, at least a part of this is due to the fact that Jebe and Subutai had maybe 20 to 30,000 men with them. Just not enough to conquer this breadth of territory. I bring this up because I think it's an interesting historiographical point, and I want you to keep this in mind while watching my video on Jebe and Subutai's expedition in the Caucasus, and then the forthcoming one on the Khalkha River battle. I went out of my way not to call the expedition a raid, and we'll call it an expedition because that's a bit neutral, you might say. So, was it a great raid? Possibly. Was it a so-so conquest? Possibly. Could be a little bit of both. Maybe perhaps the Mongols were only intending to conquer up to the borders of the Kingdom of Georgia and then pass then. Just skip through this territory until we get to the Kipchaks. And then that didn't go as hot as they might have expected. However, such is history that we can make calculated, estimated guesses, which is where all the fun comes in studying these things.